Check to see if we have a
Who's on my committee?
And Stuart, Arcelia vice chair. You got the chair and the vice
But we don't have a quorum, we need 3.
You can
chair. Well, you
name,
got 3. You got Amy.
Yeah.
name somebody, I guess.
Did you name ready to this committee by any chance?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill,
Or, yeah,
we're good, I think.
yeah.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's 9:03. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Committee on Affordability, Accounting and Planning meeting. Please be advised this meeting is being broadcast over the internet and is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to yield to Chairman Stedman for introducing the new board members and committee appointees.
Thank you, Javed, and good morning, everyone. Let's see, I'm pleased to introduce at least one new board member. Mike Plank is Chairman and CEO of the Plank Companies, a diversified holding company with numerous operating entities and investments. He was appointed by Governor Abbott to serve on the Governor's University Research Initiative Board and is appointed by Lieutenant Governor Patrick as chair of the Transportation Advisory Board's Port Subcommittee and to the Port Authority Advisory Committee. Mike graduated with honors from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. Mike, would you like to say a few words?
Words would be appropriate. Anyway, my distinct pleasure to be joining the coordinating board. I look forward to my service and look forward to learning from you all in the years to come. Excited about it.
Great. Looking forward to working with you. Welcome. Good morning. Welcome Wilson is President and CEO of Welcome Group, a real estate development firm specializing in single-tenant office buildings and industrial buildings, including lab, warehouse, and manufacturing facilities. He serves on numerous boards, including the Trellis Company and the Trellis Foundation in Austin, and is the former vice chairman of the University of Houston System Board of Regents. He attended the University of Denver. Welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure, thank you very much. Like Mike, look forward to working with the board and with the organization on look forward to working with the board and the organization going forward and with all the great work you do, and proud to be here. I just need to figure out how to negotiate Highway 183 construction coming in. So any advice you guys have, I'll be.
The answers come in the night. The answers come in the night before, but I know you had a good excuse.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well, anyway. Well, welcome to the board. I think it's you'll really enjoy it. Okay. At this time, I'm appointing Donna Williams to serve as vice chair of the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success and as a member of the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. I'm appointing Mike to serve on the Agency Operations Committee and the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. Technically, I can't appoint you, welcome, to a committee yet because he has not received his statutorily required orientation session. He's here today to listen but not deliberate in the meetings. Later this afternoon, after he receives his orientation, I will appoint welcome to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success and the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. And last, but certainly not least, I'm appointing Fred as chair of the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. So, Javed, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 2 is considering of an approval of minutes from the December 13, 2017 committee meeting. Is there any questions or discussion? If not, I need a motion and a second, please.
Move for approval?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? No, the motion, agenda item 2 is now approved. Agenda item number 3 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar. This consent calendar includes non-controversial items that can be approved without comments or discussion. This allows us to save time for the other items that need more of our attention. The consent items are highlighted in gray on the agenda. There's no items on the consent calendar. Are there any agenda items that anyone would like to move to consent calendar? If not, there's no discussion. If the motion, I need a motion and a second, please.
Make a motion for the approval.
Any discussion? No? If all in favor, it's approved. Agenda item number 3. Agenda item number 4 is public testimony on the agenda relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accounting, and Planning. We do not have any public testimony. We move on to agenda item 5F. Will be taken out of order in consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to the coordinating board legislative priorities of the 86 Texas legislation. Mr. John White, Director of External Affairs, will provide an overview of the staff legislative recommendation and will be available to answer any question. Good morning, Ms.
Good morning. For our new board members, my name is John Wyatt. I'm Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board. And my team and I work with the legislature to advance the board's policy and funding priorities during the session. So what we're asking for today is the committee's consideration and approval of a slate of draft policy recommendations that we will then pursue with legislators. I will go through these, and then, of course, as we go along, any questions and any discussion that you wish to have, please feel free to interrupt me. In terms of how we organize our recommendations, we have 3 categories. Category 1 are major policy recommendations to achieve 60 by 30 techs. These are really at the level where we're going to be depending on board members and the commissioner to weigh in with legislators, to make phone calls, to really help us in terms of communicating the importance of these priorities to members and other office holders. Category 2 are more programmatic changes. That's something that usually it's going to be at the commissioner and assistant commissioner level to make that communication. And then Category 3 are more statutory cleanup and can probably be handled by more mid-level staff. We have 4 items in our Category 1 that I'll go through. The first recommendation is regarding the approval of new off-campus sites. These are physical locations at which academic, technical, or research activities will be provided that are off existing campuses. So the idea here is that as institutions seek to open new geographical locations, currently they are able to do that even if similar activity is being provided by another institution in that same area. This is a concern that's been raised last session. We actually had this recommendation last session as well. And relevant legislation did pass the Senate, but was not considered by the House. So what we're recommending is that we bring that recommendation to the legislature again this session. There's actually one of the reasons why I'm going a little earlier today is that there is a hearing this afternoon. The Senate Higher Education Committee is going to have a hearing on this same issue, and Commissioner Paredes will be testifying for the coordinating board. The objective of this recommendation is to fulfill the board's duty to ensure that state resources are not being used unnecessarily or duplicatively in terms of providing higher education. So the coordinating board having a role in reviewing and approving these new off-campus sites would allow us to ensure that we are not wastefully duplicating state resources. Our next recommendation is for our Texas Works internship program. The idea for this actually comes out of the tri-agency work that we did along with the Workforce Commission and TEA a couple years ago. And that report to the governor identified increasing the availability of paid internships as one of the most important ways we can help develop the Texas economy, but also help students afford higher education. So specifically what we're proposing is that the current Texas College Work-Study Program statute would be amended to create a Texas Works program. This program would allow employers to come to the coordinating board directly and be able to work through us to offer these paid internship opportunities off campus. It would not replace on-campus work study, it would simply supplement work study. And the idea is that we have employers who want to be able to have a central entity that they can contract with to offer these, as opposed to having to go to 37 separate universities or 50 separate community college districts. So we would work with those employers. The state would help subsidize those paid work opportunity, and we would ensure that those work opportunities included marketable skills, and contributed to the students' development, academic and professional development. So that recommendation would also help students afford their education by virtue of the paid nature of the work. Yes.
John, good morning.
Morning.
I have a question. I like everything about this proposal, but what are the downsides, if there's any, for the coordinating board to serve in this capacity in terms of risk? Are we actually serving as, somewhat what responsibilities do we have to these students, if any?
It's an excellent question. So we would not actually be the employer. We would essentially be the clearinghouse. So we would be able to connect employers with students who are interested in these work-study opportunities. So there shouldn't be any liability issues upon the coordinating board. Currently, the statute requires that institutions provide, I believe it's 20% of their work study off campus. So we would simply be taking that off of the institutions and allowing us to connect those relevant employers with the student.
Thank you.
Yeah, just an editorial comment. I think this is really, really important. It was interesting in that there's a higher education foundation, and the chairman of the meeting is an attorney. And what, business, or what he said, law firms figured out long ago that the best way to vet potential hires is internships. And so the interns get money, they get work experience that's valuable, plus the employer gets an opportunity to see, that person. It's a much more effective, much cheaper way than going through a bunch of resumes and a bunch of interviews. I guess, Commissioner, if you could just briefly talk about the Amazon issue and how this came about, that Amazon, tell that story.
Well, a little bit of background prior to the Amazon issue. We've been thinking about this for some time. Every approach to a legislative session involves some consideration of how much more money we'll ask for in regard to Texas grant. And it's become apparent to a number of us here that that kind of dependence on grant money is unsustainable. Every year we ask for a significant increase in Texas grant funding, and every session the legislative budget gets tighter. So we were looking for other ways that we could provide significant amounts of support to college students without it being specifically grant aid. We talked to the leadership of the Texas Workforce Commission. They aggressively support this approach for the reasons that you mentioned. Students get work experience that's directly relevant to a possible career. Companies get an opportunity to examine the work of a student intern closely and carefully and make an assessment about whether they want to make a job offer. The Amazon deal just came to us. We didn't know about it, but Amazon approached us and they said they wanted to hire 500 work study students in Texas. and they said that their only condition was they wanted a single point of contact. They didn't want to negotiate with 30 different universities to say, okay, you provide us 15, you provide us 20, and so forth. They wanted just to negotiate with one entity that could help organize this effort of providing 500 interns. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity. The internships were involved working in call centers. They could work from home. They could work from the library at their campus. They could work all different kinds of hours. So it seemed like a wonderful opportunity to provide financial aid and actual support to the students. So we thought that the Amazon experience was something that we could build on, and we did come to understand pretty early in the process as we talked to corporate leaders that this single point of contact made a lot of sense and made doing this kind of work more attractive. And in order to do that, we had to change the statutes.
John, I got a question regarding the giving coordinating board the authority to approve any kind of new schools or anything. What I heard is that we used to have that authority. It was taken away. Can you give me a little brief history why?
Certainly. And so in 2011, our Sunset Bill passed. And previous to that, we actually reviewed and approved facilities. So it wasn't just about new geographical locations, but if a university wanted to build a new building on campus, that was something that the coordinating board had review and approval authority for. That authority was removed by the legislature. The argument was made that essentially these are decisions that only impact that institution or that system, so why does the coordinating board have a role in that? What we came to realize, though, was implicit in that authority was we were able to review and approve these new sites. So we took away the element of it that did particularly involve the coordinating board, being able to make sure that when an institution moves into a new geographical location, it's not duplicating what's already being offered in that location. And I think it's important to stress that in what we're trying to do this time, we are not looking to get the full authority back that we had previously. We are not saying that if you build a new building on your existing main campus that we should have approval. It's only when you move into a new geographical location that we should review and approve.
Thank you.
Just clarify if anyone's listening, and that's not approval of the building, just the location. I just want to clarify that.
We don't want to look at your square footage and whether you're meeting EPA standards. We want to look at what you're proposing to offer in this new geographical site. Is it duplicating courses and programs and other educational activity that already exists? Our third category one is the 60 by 30 TX graduation bonus. As you may be aware, currently community colleges and technical colleges both have performance-based funding methodologies. And Dr. Eklund is going to talk about those extensively later. However, the university sector does not have any performance system in its funding. So what we're proposing is a recommendation that comes out of the Formula Advisory Committee, which is to create a graduation bonus. The graduation bonus would fund universities for $500 for each non-at-risk graduate that they produce. That's undergraduate degrees. And $1,000 for each at-risk undergraduate degree that they produce based on the previous 3 years. There is, and Dr. Eklund will discuss this, we do differ in terms of how we structure it a bit with the Formula Advisory Committee. Our recommendation is that this be instituted as a part of the operations support formula, so that regardless of overall funding levels, that this graduation bonus is included in their base funding. So that's our recommendation going forward. We think it's important that universities have a strong incentive to increase the number of degrees that they're awarding, but we also recognize that helping at-risk students get a degree requires some extra effort. And that's why we have double the funding for degrees to at-risk students.
John, I have a question. Can you review for the new board members also a little history on how the formula funding works from the formula committee, and then as it comes to the committee and to the commissioner and to the legislature, how it all ties together?
Certainly. And I think Dr. Eklund's going to give a pretty extensive overview of that in her presentation.
That's
so
correct.
I might defer
will
to her.
go through that.
Any further questions on this item? And then our final Category 1 recommendation is regarding improving student transfer, specifically strengthening the role of the Texas core curriculum in facilitating transfer. So the core curriculum is a set of 42 hours that all institutions are required to have a defined core at their institution. And students are required to take that core. However, within the core, there are many, many different options for courses that students can take. What we would like to do is limit those options so that students are taking courses that are directly relevant to the degree that they ultimately wish to pursue. The issue with the core is that you can take a course that will count toward the core, but might not count toward your degree program. So for instance, if you're looking to major in biology and you satisfy your core science requirement through physics, you really haven't helped yourself. So the goal here is to help focus those options for students so that they can take courses that are going to count toward their degree, either at the institution or when they transfer to their final institution. Questions on that? So the next set I'll try to go through relatively quickly, but these are Category 2. They're more programmatic enhancements. The idea behind these is to make our operations and how we serve students and institutions more efficient. The first is compliance monitoring. We have a compliance monitoring responsibility at the coordinating board in terms of ensuring that institutions are appropriately using state financial aid dollars, in terms of ensuring that they are correctly reporting data that is used to determine formula funding, and that's done through our compliance monitoring staff. The compliance monitoring staff operates on a risk-based protocol, so that in terms of when they are actually going out to institutions to take a look at them, that's based on their determination of risk. And this recommendation is to require that institutions report their receipt and determination of allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse to the coordinating board so that that can be used as part of our risk assessment. It is not that we may investigate those allegations, it is that those allegations will become part of how we assess risk at that institution. Currently, the code requires that those be reported to the SAO. We would simply add the coordinating board as a recipient of those reports. We have a recommendation to remove statute that forbids the coordinating board from considering undergraduate graduation rates when considering doctoral programs. This is also a legacy of our 2011 Sunset Bill, in which that was added. The argument at the time being that an institution's success with their undergraduates did not have relevance to whether they should be offering doctoral programs. The concern is that institutions should be focusing, particularly in light of our 60 by 30 goals, on their undergraduate success. Our goals for completion and our goals for attainment require many more baccalaureate and undergraduate degrees. So we would like to be able to consider whether an institution is being successful with their undergraduates, particularly undergraduates in relevant programs to that doctoral proposal when we're considering it. So that would leave to us to determine how relevant is that undergraduate success to their doctoral proposal.
John, has there been any examples off the top of your head that where the lack of success in undergraduate programs would make you reluctant, the staff reluctant to recommend approval of a PhD program?
I might have to defer to David or the commissioner on that.
I think going forward, there's been so much improvement in graduation rates that there would be less concern than there would have been 5 years ago. But you do want to make sure that 9% of our students are undergraduates. We want to make sure that their needs are being met. Unfortunately, some institutions will implement doctoral programs and sort of take some resources from the undergraduate level to help supplement that graduate program. So ultimately, we're looking for the overall success of not only the undergraduate students, but the graduate program as well. And so it's important to call attention to that. And we know that not all institutions are going to have 82% graduation rates, but they should be better than they are in a number of cases.
Well, yeah, that then is a powerful argument. Hey, don't sacrifice your undergraduate, program if you're not graduating students to build a PhD program. So that's I understand that.
More questions on that item? Our next recommendation is regarding dual credit. Specifically, the recommendation is that high school students be required to demonstrate college readiness via a recognized assessment, those being the SAT, ACT, and the TSIA, before they can take academic dual credit courses. The concern here is that currently there are non-college readiness pathways for a student to be dual credit eligible. They're listed at the bottom of that slide. But dual credit courses are college courses, and they're expected to be up to college rigor. So we believe it's important that before a student take that course, just as if they were going to enroll in a university or a community college, they demonstrate that they're ready for it. It helps the student, it helps the institution ensure that they can maintain a rigorous program. And so we're making that proposal. One element of this that we've heard concern about is, well, what about a student who can't afford to take the SAT? What about a student who might be in a geographically remote high school that doesn't have easy access to the TSIA? So what we have proposed is identifying a means by which a public high school student would be able to take one of those assessments at least once free of charge. So that everybody, regardless of their means, regardless of their situation, is able to demonstrate their college readiness to be eligible to take dual credit.
Good question. So, the SAT, most people, and correct me if I'm wrong, but don't take it like their freshman year, and there's people taking dual credit as their freshman. So how would that situation play out?
So currently, as I said, there are ways, for instance, you can take the PSAT. There's a certain score on the PSAT you can get that allows you to be considered dual credit eligible. But the PSAT doesn't have a validated college readiness score. So that score doesn't really necessarily relate to their college readiness. What we would propose with this is that the student would have to take the test beforehand, but we would either help subsidize that test so that if you want to take it, the SAT early, or the TSIA, which is very widely available, you would have that opportunity.
But will they be prepared to take the test? I mean, some of the courses aren't offered freshman year that you probably need to perform well on the SAT or ACT. So.
They may not be prepared to take for the test, but then that leads to the argument, are they prepared for the course? So if they're not prepared to achieve a college readiness score in math on the SAT, are they really ready for a college level math course?
Who would be opposed to this?
I think the concern that we heard, we proposed to do this through rule 2 years ago, and the concern we heard particularly from legislative offices is everybody going to be able to take the exam? However, I think there could be some concerns among school districts. There could be some concerns among community college districts that it would limit the number of people who are taking dual credit, potentially. And dual credit has become a major source of formula funding for community colleges. It's an accountability measure for ISDs. So they always want to tread very carefully when we're talking about potentially limiting dual credit.
Thank you.
Do you have a cost estimate of what it would take to fund to make it available, one of these tests?
We do not, and that is something that we're working on, and particularly we're going to have to figure out what's the right mechanism for doing this that doesn't create perverse incentives. We want to make sure that we're creating the ability for students who need assistance, but not students who don't need it.
I think I thought about this priority a little bit since our meeting in January. And I understand and I completely am on board with the idea of demonstrating college readiness, but I have a little bit of concern regarding some of the logistical difficulties involved here with substituting the SAT for the PSAT, or I guess Aspire is the equivalent for the ACT. My understanding is now a lot of ISDs will pre-register students for the PSAT. They will offer it for free. It's a much shorter exam. Frequently, it will be offered in the 8th grade year as well as the sophomore year. The SAT, in contrast, is a much longer exam, logistically speaking. I mean, aside from cost, and it is costlier, it requires a full Saturday. It's a much longer test. I just want to be sure, and I know that you said that the SAT is not considered a college readiness.
The PSAT.
I'm sorry, the PSAT.
Yeah.
But I would expect that the PSAT does predict, a student's score on the PSAT would predict a high degree of the subsequent variability on the SAT. I'm also a little bit worried about what you were saying regarding the SAT, where I would be concerned that students would take the SAT very early in their high school career before they were prepared to attain the high score they possibly could, and might not subsequently retake the exam their junior year when applying. So I want to be sure that this isn't adding additional obstacles in, if that makes sense, that are not already being, it's an objective that isn't already being met by the tests that are currently in place.
I think that is important, and a couple things to note here. The recommendations that you adopt today and that the board adopts in April are the recommendations, but we very well may be coming back to you in subsequent board meetings to try to amend those recommendations based on feedback and findings that we get as we move forward. One thing with all of these recommendations is there's always the potential out there for unforeseen impacts, the possibility that, we might not have considered particular aspects of it. So we still have the ability to change these as we move forward if we do find, this does create an insurmountable barrier for students who should be able to take dual credit. Now, of course, the goal here is to identify those who should and shouldn't. But we also want to make sure that the opportunity does exist for those students for whom dual credit would be a benefit.
If I could just add an anecdote. So we have a ranch manager whose wife is a advisor at Texas A&M Kingsville. And her take on dual credit, not in every case, but she sees a lot of students come into A&M Kingsville with enough credits to be a junior. And they start out taking junior level courses and they can't handle it and they flunk out. And so, that rigor, that overarching issue, okay, is it truly college rigorous, in the high school? I guess that's what my personal concern is, and I think this is part of that way to address that.
Yeah, John, I also, what Stuart just said, I concur, that there's no question that we want people to be ready with the dual credit. So I like this proposal. But like Annie says, too, from a student's perspective, the SAT is a little bit more difficult than some of those are the two testing mechanisms. So there's no doubt that we do have an issue with college readiness with the dual program. And Stuart's example that the person he knows is happening. So we want people to be college ready, and we do need to establish a recommendation. So I like the recommendation. I'm kind of like Annie. I just want to make sure that we don't put any barriers that would preclude people from being able to get to that point by not being ready to take the SAT too early because they haven't taken the courses. Gotcha. So that's my concern. But I definitely agree that we need stronger college readiness applications. Thank you.
Commissioner?
I wanted to say regarding Annie's thoughtful comments, we're very concerned about the issues you've raised. We're aware of them. My own view is that the greater danger is that we dilute, water down the quality, the rigor of dual credit courses to the point where dual credit programs lose credibility with universities. So we've got two conflicting goals here. I think we can resolve them But I would argue the greater danger is that dual credit programs lose rigor and consequently respectability. So that's what we want to protect against. I agree with what John said. If you can't pass one of the three instruments that we use, the TSIA, the SAT, or the ACT, you probably shouldn't be taking dual credit courses.
Okay, partner.
I just wanted to point out that in the calls committee this afternoon, the last rule on the agenda has to do with being able to use the PSAT version, the one that reflects for the national merit exam, as showing eligibility for dual credit, not college readiness. And so you'll discuss that later today. So PSAT changed so that they had various tests that predict whether you're going to be college ready later. But this particular exam will not talk about for the national merit, not whether you're college ready, but will indicate whether you would be prepared to do a dual credit course. So there's an opportunity for full discussion of that. And so part of what your concerns are being addressed in that rule.
Sure, and I would also be curious to hear regarding, I'm less familiar with the Aspire test and the ACT. Essentially, my concern is if the PSAT is a very, very strong indicator of your eventual score on the SAT, and the SAT is a test for college readiness, then I'm essentially kind of missing the gap here why the PSAT wouldn't be a...
But I guess, as I understand it, David, correct me if I'm wrong, PSAT basically has a score that can say you're on the path to college readiness, but it doesn't say that you're college ready. And so if you're going to be taking a college course, which is what a dual credit course is, that's a full college level course, we want some demonstration that you are at that point college ready.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to move on. If you have information on those tests, I would be...
Part of what's not exactly coming out here is the PSAT changed their exam in just the last 2 or 3 years. So there's a version for different grade levels that really provides a predictor of whether they think you'll be ready by the time you're a senior. But we still have the version that's used for national merit, and it doesn't have a college readiness predictor, as John mentioned, but it can be used to at least say we believe the person is ready to take the dual credit, but it doesn't substitute for this. And one thing to underline here is most testing that high school students take are paid for. The exams they roll, these are exams that are not. And one thing that isn't discussed is that we know that one of our staff mentioned the other day that there are studies that show if students take the SAT or the ACT that they're actually more likely to attend college. Part of that is they're anticipating doing it, but there are some in maybe Ohio, Indiana, Maine, there are 1 or 2 states where they have taken these tests statewide that the college going has actually gone up. So there's that side of it as well, a benefit.
More questions on this item? The next recommendation is to increase our bonding authority. Currently, we are limited in statute to requesting $75 million per issuance when we go to issue bonds. These bonds are what support our student loan program. The concern is that the state has a cap on bonding authority. Previously, it has not been an issue for us to come back and subsequently request another $75 million in order to meet our need. But in the last couple of years, that cap is getting used. So the concern is that if we are not able to fully meet our bonding need through that initial $75 million, will there still be bonding authority left when we come back for a second attempt at the second bite at the apple? So what we're proposing is simply to increase that limit on our per project bonding authority to $200 million. That will be, our estimate is that will be more than enough to serve our needs for many years to come. We're proposing a couple of recommendations regarding modifications to our Texas Grant and TEOG programs. So Texas Grant is our major grant program for universities, our state grant program for universities. TEOG is our major state grant program for two-year institutions. For Texas Grant, we're recommending that we limit the total number of hours that a student may receive a Texas Grant to 135 hours or 15 hours beyond their degree requirements, a typical baccalaureate degree being 120 hours. The current limit is 150 hours. The recommendation has two purposes. One is to help incent students to complete their education in a more timely manner. This would essentially give them basically a semester beyond their degree requirements to complete. It also allows us to take that funding that would have gone to those students between 135 and 150 and redistribute it to other eligible students so that we're able to meet a larger percentage of the need out there for Texas grants. Our recommendation for TEOG is to allow students enrolled in community college baccalaureate degree programs to receive a TEOG grant. Currently, there is not state financial aid, or at least not a state financial aid grant program available for community college baccalaureate students. That's been relatively limited in the past when there were only 3 institutions that could offer community college baccalaureates. But as you know, last session, the legislature expanded the ability of community colleges to offer these degrees. So we want to assure as that more students are taking these community college baccalaureates, there is a financial aid program available to them. We have a recommendation regarding the nursing shortage reduction program. That program has essentially, there's 3 elements to it, but one of the elements is to essentially forward fund eligible nursing programs so that they receive an amount of funding at the beginning of the year to hire faculty, to purchase equipment, and then they're required to meet certain targets in terms of graduation and licensure. The difficulty some institutions have had with that model is they get forward funded, but if they don't meet their targets, they have to return the funding. As a budgeting mechanism, that's very difficult for them because if they don't know whether they're going to have to return it or not, the incentive is to hold on to the money until you know that you have it. And so the purpose for which this structure was created to allow you to forward fund isn't happening. So what we would like to do is to work with the nursing programs and other stakeholders to identify, is there a better mechanism for allocating this funding efficiently and ensuring that it's actually being used for the purpose of helping to produce more nursing graduates. And these last category 3, I can go through pretty quickly. These are just statute cleanup and minor revisions. The student loan program statute, there have been constitutional amendments that have changed some of the relevant wording. A couple of programs that are no longer active still exist in statute. Our proposal is just to clean up that statute to align with the Constitution and our current practice. Unnecessary data requests. We have a requirement every 5 years to convene a negotiated rulemaking committee to look at the data that we're requesting from institutions and identify any requests that are unnecessary or could be met through other means. We had that negotiated rulemaking committee and they identified unanimously several data reporting elements. Some of them we can fix through rule, some of them we can remove just through our practice, but there are a couple that are statutorily required. And so we're going to request that the legislature remove those reporting requirements from statute. Including dual credit and degree plan requirements. There was a law passed last session that requires a student at a community college to file a degree plan within the 2nd semester that they arrive on campus after earning 30 semester credit hours. So essentially, once you arrive on campus, that 2nd semester, if you have dual credit, you have to file a degree plan. The concern is that, and this is relevant to what Stuart was discussing earlier, students could be earning 30, 40, 60 hours of dual credit before they even set foot on a college campus. So what we would propose with this is that at 30 hours earned, regardless of whether it's through dual credit hours, you would be required to file a degree plan. The idea being that you need to be advised, even in high school, how your courses are going to be relevant to your degree. If you're taking dual credit courses willy-nilly without a lot of thought as to how they're going to apply to your degree, you're going to end up with a lot of wasted hours that aren't going to help you efficiently advance toward that baccalaureate.
John, it's important to underscore that point. We just talked about the transfer issues a moment ago. Dual credit vastly complicates transfer issues, particularly because the courses tend to be clustered in the humanities, the social sciences, and there are relatively fewer courses that students are taking and passing in STEM fields. So you're going to have, there's a danger that we'll have students that accumulate a glut of courses in disciplines that for understandable reasons, universities won't accept. So we not only have these problems that are generally related to rigor and so forth, but there's a real issue that's getting more and more serious as students accumulate more hours in dual credit courses and how it relates to transferability.
And this is really, the legislature 2 sessions ago really kind of took off any kind of restriction on the amount of dual credit that a student can take in high school. So we're starting to see these, the amount of dual credit that's being taken substantially increase. We think dual credit's a good thing, but we want it to be rigorous and we want it to help a student advance toward their degree. And then our final recommendation is an improvement to the Apply Texas system. We want to ensure that ISDs are using a standardized electronic format for submitting their information to institutions. Currently, there's a lot of different ways ISDs are submitting those transcripts, so we want to have a common solution to reduce administrative burden. So those are the recommendations. Couple of caveats that I'll lay out. We are asking you to advance these recommendations today, but there's a lot of time between now and session, and there may well come new things that we need you to look at. In fact, two that I can all but guarantee we're going to have to talk about again. We have a dual credit study that is currently underway that's looking at really all aspects of dual credit in Texas, and we expect those results in midsummer. Based on that study, we may well want to either amend some of the dual credit recommendations we have here or add additional recommendations. And in order to do that, we will come back to y'all. The other item is you may be aware that the governor sent a letter to the commissioner a couple weeks ago asking him to work with the governor's office, DPS, and the Texas School Safety Commission to come up with recommendations for the legislature regarding campus safety. And so that is something that we'll be working on, and we'll have a recommendation that we will share with you before the session. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman. Are there any other interim meetings scheduled with the legislature other than the one coming up today?
Nothing's scheduled yet. So we have Senate Higher Ed today, but we do expect over the course of the spring and the summer there'll be a lot more interim hearings. I've heard that House Higher Ed is looking for a late July interim hearing on dual credit, but I don't think anything's been nailed down yet.
No, if no question, I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion 5F
Thank
is
you.
approved. We go back to agenda item 5A is considering adopting the commissioner's recommendation of committee relating to the funding formula for use by the governor and the legislative budget board in making appropriation recommendation to the appropriate legislative committee. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide general background on formula funding, introduce the committee chair, who will be presenting and present the commissioner's recommendation. This committee will vote after each sector recommendation have been discussed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anwar, and welcome to our new committee members. We have a multifaceted presentation for you this morning. So first, a general overview. I'm going to be providing some background about our formula funding process. I'd like to right now introduce Mr. David Young, who is over the funding area in the Strategic Planning and Funding Division, and I've asked him to jump in and clarify at any point during my presentation if there's something he'd like to add, and so he's available to us as a resource. I will be introducing our Formula Advisory Committee chairs as we reach that portion of the presentation. After the overview, I'll do a brief overview of each of the sectors we'll be hearing about. I will introduce the chairs. They will provide the Formula Advisory Committee recommendations for their group. Then I will be presenting the commissioner's recommendation to this committee, after which point there will be discussion, and we will take a vote after each of the sector presentations. So we'll have 3 separate votes this morning. So the coordinating board is required by law to get input from higher education institutions when it develops its formula funding recommendations to the legislature. And these recommendations are done once every 2 years. We appoint a committee for each of the 3 higher education sectors. Again, the committee chairs are here with us today. The chancellors and presidents nominate members to be on these committees. And the Texas And as I said before, law requires the coordinating board to recommend funding levels and the formulas that allocate them. So this is a timeline for the process. We complete our advisory committee recommendations, and the commissioner provides charges to the committees in the summer. The committee members begin meeting in August. They met through the fall of this year. Once they have developed their recommendations in a report, the committee chairs present the recommendations to the commissioner. And actually, today we're on the 3rd bullet when the commissioner and I will be presenting his recommendations to the committee. The board will adopt the formula committee recommendations in April, so at the next meeting, and then our staff will forward the formula recommendations to the Legislative Budget Board and the Governor's Office by June 1st. Then the Legislative Budget Board will run the formulas using data we've provided for spring, summer, and fall of 2018, and this is called preliminary base year data. And then when the 86th Texas Legislature convenes, they will be making recommendations. They will appropriate money for funding. They will, of course, have the recommendations that have been provided. They will pass the General Appropriations Act, which will include the funding for the formulas, and the governor will sign the Appropriations Act in June. We do provide final base year data in April to the Legislative Budget Board. So in terms of timing, there were 2 submissions of data, and it includes information about student enrollment. And you'll see as I walk through the presentation how that all falls into place. So we have 5 sectors that we'll be talking about today, and 3 of them are for our 2-year colleges, and so we had 1 advisory committee that looked at 3 sectors. I want to call your attention to bullets 2 and 3 here. The formulas are designed to equitably distribute funds among the institutions, but they're not a budget. The institutions will receive lump sum appropriations, which they can use as they see fit for several allowable purposes, and I'll talk about that purposes by sector when we get to that portion. And another thing to note is that, again, the committee will adopt recommendations for the formulas, but ultimately the decision for what to fund is up to the legislature. And then I just wanted to make one comment about the first bullet here. You'll see today that basically the formulas at this point in time, enrollment is still the primary driver for those formulas, but our commissioner feels that support for completion-based funding is really a priority. We have this in some of our sectors. We do not have it in all of our sectors. So, and then finally, a short note about the differences among the sectors. And these are primarily related to the methodologies that I'll go into momentarily. But the community college formula funding is 100% general revenue, and the others include general revenue and general revenue dedicated. And the GRD actually consists primarily of appropriated tuition and fees, which are included in the formula for those sectors. Okay, so now we're going to move on to an overview of the community and technical college formulas. And first, let me briefly explain the differences in these three sectors of two-year institutions. Our state colleges are two-year, lower-level institutions. They're similar to the community colleges, but they receive infrastructure funding instead of local taxes. Texas has three state colleges: Lamar State College Orange, Lamar State College Port Arthur, and Lamar Institute of Technology. And as you'll see, they have their own formula and recommendations affiliated. This Texas State Technical College system focuses on technical education, and of course we have our community colleges, of which we have 50 districts and 72 community colleges in the state. We generally will refer to these as CTCs, or community and technical colleges, and we're referring to all three sectors when we do that. So first, let's talk about the community colleges. This chart shows the revenue sources for our community colleges. The outside ring shows the revenue sources, and the inside rings show which sources are appropriated and which are non-appropriated. So if you see the green part of the pie there, that is what is appropriated through the legislature, and you can see the formula general revenue portion of that, which of course is what we'll be discussing today. So the community college formula funding may be used for several purposes, as we show on this slide, such as instruction, departmental operating expenses, etc. The current formulas for community colleges were introduced in the 2014-2015 biennium. I want to pause just a minute here. What you'll see a mention of contact hours when we talk about the community and technical college formulas, and you'll hear us talking about semester credit hours when we talk about the university formula or the Bachelor of Applied Technology formula that you'll see in here. A contact hour is a measure that basically represents an hour of scheduled instruction that's given to a student. So 50 minutes in class would be considered a contact hour. When we talk about semester credit hours, we're talking about time that's spent in class, say for example 50 minutes, but it would be each week over the course of a semester. So one semester credit hour is approximately 16 contact hours. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The community college formula provides a minimum amount of funding for each district that's called core funding. So that's the bullet you see second from the bottom there. There is also contact hour funding and student success point funding for the community colleges. And the BAT is the Bachelor of Applied Technology, and there's a formula for that that's a very small part of the total formula. Again, these formulas distribute funds to the 50 community college districts. They don't set budgets. The core formula actually replaced the small institution supplement, and it's designed to provide a minimum amount of funding to each district. So while the amount is the same for every district in terms of that core funding, it's much more significant for the smaller colleges than the larger colleges. And this is important to remember because there's some costs that don't vary in terms of infrastructure for those small as well as the large colleges. Here's an overview of the student success point funding. This is, of course, our performance. It's a type of performance-based funding that we have. For each milestone completed by a student in an academic year, the institution receives the listed points towards the outcomes-based formula. The points are grouped in the 5 areas you'll see here: developmental education, gateway course completion, college credit attainment, credentials awarded, and transfer. Research supports that these particular metrics are critical for student success as students move through the pipeline. And note that the success points for the 2018-2019 biennia were about 10.6% of the formula received by community colleges. And it's slightly up from the previous biennia where it was 10%. So this is an example of how the contact hour formulas work for the community colleges. In this example, community colleges have 291 million contact hours in the base period. And again, as a reminder, those contact hours are the time students spent in class, so a 16-week course would be 48 contact hours. The coordinating board recommended average in this example is $5.49 per contact hour per biennium. So that rate, $5.49, times the 291 million contact hours equals the level of funding recommended for the biennium of $1.6 billion. And we actually base this example on the recommendation that's going, you're going to look at today. And again, the legislature will have the final say in terms of what is actually funded. The state college's funding is allocated using 3 formulas. The majority of the funds are allocated using the college's contact hours and the same rates as the community colleges, and a smaller portion of the funds are allocated using predicted square feet and the general academics, education, and general space support rate. State colleges with a head count that fall below 5,000 receives $375,000 each biennia as a small institution supplement, and this amount tapers off as the colleges reach a fall head count of 10,000. The supplement recognizes that all schools require a certain amount of infrastructure funding. The technical college funding for the 2018-19 biennia was also allocated using 3 formulas. The majority of the funds were allocated using the college's return value formula, which I'll explain on the next slide. A smaller portion of the funds were allocated using the predicted square feet and the general academics E&G space support at the general academic space support rate. And finally, the technical colleges received the same small institution supplement as the state colleges, $375,000 per year or $750 per biennium per campus. And this slide goes into detail about the returned value funding model. This is an outcomes-based funding model, and our TCs are primarily funded through their outcomes. Their appropriations are distributed based on their completers, leavers, and transfers wages above minimum wage, which are tracked for 5 years after graduation. And a percent of the increases comes back to the state as tax revenues. And then finally, I've shared on the next 2 slides the commissioner's charges to the CTC Formula Advisory Committee. Our committee chair is going to go into detail about each of these charges. I just wanted you to have an opportunity to see them. Again, recommendations related to overall funding. There were some recommendations related to dual credit and to competency-based education. But now I'd like to hand the presentation over to Dr. Pamela Anglin, who is the chair of our CTC Formula Advisory Committee. She is the president of Paris Junior College. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Anglin.
Thank you, Dr. Eklund, and thank you for allowing me to present the recommendations of the Community and Technical College Formula Funding Committee. I want to thank the folks from the coordinating board that worked with us. Roland Gilmore was our coordinating board liaison and provided us with all of the data and information that we requested as we did our work. Our committee was a group made up of individuals on the community college side from small, medium, and large community colleges, and our work groups were chaired by people that represented the different sectors. Jeremy McMillan was one of our work group leads. He was also vice chair of the committee, and he's president of Grayson College. But we had Mike Reeser, who's chancellor of the TSTC system, chair a work group, and then Mary Wickland, that represented the state colleges, she chaired a work group. So there was direct involvement from all of the 3 sectors represented. First of all, I want to start with the first, let's see. There we go. Okay. Okay. The first charge from the commissioner was recommending appropriate funding levels for the contact hour, core, and the student success. For the community colleges, our recommendation is an 8.2% increase or $144.8 million extra dollars. That recommendation comes about by funding community colleges with an increase based on projected contact hour and success point growth and adjusted for inflation. And this is based on the current projections for contact hour growth and inflation, but could be adjusted by the time that recommendations are made to the LBB. But funding community college success points at $215 per point. I think the bottom line ended up adding $44 million to the funding level instead of the 49. But that $215 per success point is important for success points to work as they were initially intended. If the success point rate goes down, then that gives the community colleges no incentive to work towards success. So maintaining a set rate, and the rate we need is $215 per success point for that system to really work as it was initially intended. I think the success points, if you look at the progress the community colleges have made since success points were implemented, and you look at the increase in graduation rates at the community colleges, you'll see that it has worked to date. But for continued success and incentive through success points, we need a standard rate, and we're recommending $215 per point. The core funding level was increased this last biennium, and we're recommending that we maintain the current core funding level of $68 million, and to maintain the current level of the Bachelor's of Applied Technology funding for the 4 institutions eligible for upper-level funding, adjusted for projected growth, and then to distribute the balance of that increase in contact hour formula funding. We were asked to look at our critical needs fields for this biennium, and we recommended that we continue to use the critical needs fields through this next biennium. And then we recommended that a committee be appointed, and we were asking that the metrics task force that was implemented before success points were put in place, with representation from the coordinating board, to study the current success points and for continued relevancy, and then make recommendations with the coordinating board to look at changing the success points, not in this biennium, but the next biennium. And the reason we're doing that, there's been a number of changes, such as changes in developmental education and us moving to the co-requisite model, looking at the fields of study, replacing some of the points. So there, with all of the changes that are taking place, we think it's time that the metrics task force be reconvened, and they have been working and looking at what recommendations need to be made to change that success point model that's being used. And we're very concerned, and everything we did, we took in mind 60 by 30.
Dr. Angler, could, on the 8.2% increase, $144.8 million, how much of that is contact hour growth? Or really, what's your inflation factor that you used?
Oh, let's see. 1.7% inflation.
So pretty modest.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
For the recommendation on state colleges, the recommending a 6.5% increase, or $2.9 million in additional dollars. This would fund $38.5 million to the state colleges for instruction and administration formula at an increase of 8.3%. And this includes $8.4 million in the statutory funds. And that increase was a projection from the state colleges based on some of their new early college high schools and increased enrollment in a prison there. The recommendation assumes a 4% growth rate in contact hours. Fund $8.6 million to the space support formula and small institution supplement. And then the funding level assumes a 2.8% decrease in growth in additional predicted square feet between fall of 2016 and fall of 2018, and a 1.7% increase for inflation. And then the recommendation, charge 2, for the appropriate level for and the refinement of TSTC's return value funding formula. We're recommending a $35.6 million increase in funding, or a 24.8% increase in their funding level. That is funding $147.1 million of general revenue and $179.1 million in all funds for the next biennium, an increase of $35.6 million, or 24.8%, which includes $32 million of general revenue dedicated statutory tuition and fees. This recommendation includes a funding level of 35% of the $370 million estimated 2011-2012 cohort return value, which is the same percentage of return value that would have been funded by the 2016-17 biennium general revenue appropriation. Then charge 3 was a recommendation on the treatment of competency-based course in formula, and the committee recommended that we continue to fund CBE courses using the existing formula calculation and updated expenditure-based weights. In doing this, contact hours are reported to the coordinating board once the student has begun engaging with the course materials, and it may only be reported if they are linked to coursework in the ACGM or WECM. And then charge 4, recommendations on the efficacy of critical need fields as they relate to contact hour and success point funding. Again, we've recommended that the metrics task force of the Texas Association of Community Colleges be reconvened to provide feedback on success point metrics, including critical fields and fields of study. And then charge 5 was to make a recommendation on a new formula to fund dual credit programs based upon the number of semester credit hours offered in dual credit by TSTC. Up to this point, TSTC has not received funding for the dual credit work that they've been doing in the high schools. So our recommendation is a $3.7 million increase to fund dual credit for TSTC. And that is based on funding TSTC dual credit exactly like the community college dual credit is funded, based on their contact hour generation. And then charge 6 is to review the existing coordinating board data on dual credit program funding and share insight on current dual credit funding mechanisms. We spent quite a bit of time talking about dual credit and looking at where we were on the RAND study and the current study that's being completed by the coordinating board, other task force that have been working throughout the state looking at dual credit, and looking at 60 by 30, and looking at what goals are going to be set for dual credit to meet 60 by 30. So at this point, with those studies all ongoing and not having the final results from the studies, the committee believes that a funding recommendation should be built upon established statewide goals for dual credit, and which reflect the role of dual credit in achieving the attainment and completion goals of the 60 by 30 plan. So at this time, identifying alternative funding methods for dual credit, it's a difficult task due to the diverse range of business models used at the various community colleges and some universities, and that we're not making a formal recommendation because we need that further research and discussions to take place. And those are our recommendations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anglin. I'm now just going to take a few minutes to share the Commissioner's recommendation, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion. But I do want to take a moment to thank you for your hard work and to thank the members of the committee. They really did a very thorough job, and I know it's a large commitment to participate in these committees, so it's very much appreciated. In terms of the Commissioner's recommendations for the career, community, and technical colleges, this is just an overview that the focus is on increases for projected growth, increases for inflation, and that is at a rate of 1.7%, which is what the committee also recommended as well. And also there's a focus on successful student completions that you'll see throughout the Commissioner's recommendations. So for the community colleges, the Commissioner concurs with all of the committee's recommendations. And you're going to see a slide similar to this one when I do comparisons throughout the presentations between the advisory committee recommendations and the Commissioner recommendations. In cases where there are differences, we've highlighted them in yellow. It's important to note that the percentages on this slide represent the changes from total formula funding in the 18-19 biennium. So you'll see the top line is what was appropriated in 18-19, and then you can see what's being recommended for addition and the amount and the percentage increase on the bottom. And as Dr. Anglin mentioned, there may be some changes to those percentages when we get the actual numbers in terms of our contact hours and include that in the rate. So the Commissioner, as you can see, also in terms of the community colleges, strongly supports the increase for success points at $215 per point. These increases overall total $144.8 million for the biennium. Again, just a reminder that we're recommending rates rather than funding levels, so there may be some changes when we get the baseline data. In terms of the Lamar State Colleges, the Commissioner proposes a 0.2% decrease for projected growth. Again, this is based on projections that we did here at the coordinating board. The contact hours are projected to increase 0.3 percentage points, but then 0.3%, but then the predicted square feet are projected to decrease 2.8%. So the Commissioner proposes, again, a 1.7% rate increase for inflation for instructions and operations, and so he concurs there, but not in terms of the overall rate increase for instructions and operations that was added. So you will see a difference in these recommendations. In terms of the technical colleges, the TSTCs, the Commissioner concurred with the advisory committee's recommendations. You'll see some slight differences in numbers on this slide versus Dr. Anglin, and I think that has more to do with how we did the math, because the spirit was the same in terms of the effort to return to 35% in terms of what's funded for the returned value formula, as well as including the 1.7% inflation. This also includes the dual credit contact hours, the funding for those. As Dr. Anglin mentioned, the committee was charged with looking at dual credit funding for the TSTCs, because students who do dual credit do not immediately go into the workforce. Generally, they're still in high school. Many of them go on to higher education. Including their wages in terms of the funding was not logical, and actually the legislature asked that there was a rider, I believe, that asked that the formula advisory committees look at possible funding mechanisms for the TSTCs for dual credit. So those recommendations align with the commissioners to fund them as we do the hours as we do at community colleges. In terms of the additional charges for competency-based education, let me just give you a little bit of background on that. Students involved who are taking competency-based education, their progress is based on demonstration of mastery of competencies. So it's not tied to time, it's tied to mastery of the material. And the mastery is measured through assessments or through the application of credit for prior learning. The recommendation is of both the committee and the commissioner is to fund competency-based education using existing formulas, but hours should be reported for students who have begun engaging with the course materials. In other words, it's not just enough for a student to say, I'm going to do competency-based education, because they're not showing up in a classroom as we would have when we're looking at census date enrollment. So there has to be some evidence that the student has begun working on the materials for the funding mechanism to kick in. The commissioner also concurs with the recommendation for critical need fields and success points, and for having that metrics task force reconvene to look at the success points. In terms of the critical need fields, you might have noticed on the slide about success points, institutions get an extra 0.25% bump in terms of the certificate and degree completion points if it's in a critical needs fields. Those fields were determined many years ago when the success points were first adopted, and there was really a sense that there was a need to look again at those critical fields. And in their discussions, the committee decided it's also a good time to look at some of the other points, again, to look at developmental education changes that have occurred, and to think about things like field of study, which currently we don't have a point awarded for that, but it's something, of course, that's becoming more important in Texas in terms of our transfer issues. And so that concludes the presentation on the recommendations. And so we're certainly open to any questions or discussion.
Any questions?
Just a quick question for Dr. Anglin. I know that you've had success points since, I think, the 83rd legislature. So I just wanted to ask if your colleagues at other institutions were happy with success points, whether they were able to connect it with, this is a little bit redundant, I know, with student success, and also whether it makes a difference in how you approach the appropriations process with the legislature?
It does, and I can't speak for everyone personally, but I think for the most part, and the community colleges have really embraced success points, and we were willing to do that at the suggestion of the legislature and come back with a proposal. But it has been, I think it's been a game changer for us, because now faculty, everyone on campus looks at success points. They understand it's tied to funding. They're more focused on, we don't want to lose students. Let's intervene where we can. Let's identify obstacles when those students are running into obstacles. Let's find what they need to help them stay in class, be successful. Measures that tutoring, embedded tutors, all kinds of things that we had not done before. In my particular case, we have on the faculty evaluations now. They know their retention rates and their success rates, and they're compared to their division retention and success rates, and the institution success rates and retention rates. So everybody knows where they stand and how they compare to others. We also compare ourselves to peer institutions. So it's a looking at data and using data to evaluate our performance throughout the institution. And success points, and I'm going to give you an example of how important they've been when this ties to dual credit. We've realized that we're losing some students that are not being successful in dual credit, and they're not eligible for federal financial aid when they graduate high school because of their GPA. They've already, and so I had a couple of people come to me yesterday and said, if we can do some senior scholarships and give them free tuition to take 6 hours this summer after they graduate, and give them an opportunity to get their grade point back up to where they become eligible for Pell this fall, then we keep them in college and we help them be successful. So it's promoting that to where people are thinking all the time about what can we do to work with these students to be successful.
there any other questions, discussion? I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion, agenda item 5A.
I think we have,
I may have missed it, but I didn't hear a recommendation. And so I'm a little unclear on what just got approved.
Right, so would the motion be to accept the commissioner's recommendations or to make any?
accept the formula funding
So
advisory.
this would be, again, to accept the commissioner's formula funding recommendations or another recommendation, correct? Yes.
Okay. So the motion here is to accept the commission's recommendation for the formula funding. All in favor?
I'll make the motion.
Make the motion again. I'll second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion, agenda item 5A is approved.
Okay, and that's for the community and technical colleges.
Right.
And so the next portion, we will move on to the general academic
Okay.
institutions. And so first, a very brief overview of how funding works for our universities. Again, GAI's, general academic institutions, we're generally talking about our public universities. This chart shows the revenue sources for the general academic institutions. The outside pie shows the revenue sources, and the inside pie shows which are appropriated and which are non-appropriated. And again, you can see at the top in the dark green those that tie to formula general revenue, and you can see that appropriated tuition and fees, which I talked about earlier. The curved line, again, is all of that, and then the appropriated tuition and fees include the statutory tuition paid by every student. So that's $50 or semester credit hours. It's not the full tuition, but it's that statutory tuition and mandatory fees. And again, they're required for all students, and they're included in the formula. So the formula funding for universities is intended to cover instruction, administration, research, and infrastructure related to these functions. As you can see, the list of allowable uses is broad, but there are some limits to the uses. The current formulas are primarily enrollment-driven. There is no funding right now at the GAIs for student completion. You can see we also have the small institution supplement. A little less than half, I think, of our universities receive some funding under that, our operations and support, and our E&G space support. So this slide goes into a little bit more detail in terms of how the weighted semester credit hours are used in the formula for the semester credit hours. This example does not include the 60 by 30 text graduation bonus. We'll be talking about that a little later, and the recommendations regarding how that would fit into the formula. So in this example, the general academic institutions have 37 million weighted semester credit hours in the base period. And as you may recall, the community and state colleges are funded based on contact hours, which is the number of hours a student is in class each hour. The general academics are funded based on the weighted semester credit hours, and these are the number of hours a regular term class meets each week times the number of weeks for the semester. So, for example, if a class meets for 1 hour 3 times a week, then that is a 3 semester credit hour class for the semester. The weights for classes vary depending on their costs, and this is important to understand. An example would be an engineering class, which would have higher weighted semester credit hours than a liberal arts class because it costs more to teach that engineering class. And the coordinating board actually does an expenditure study where we gather information from the institutions through our regular data collection process and also directly from the institutions that are used to determine the weights for the different disciplines. So again, the weighting is different for those semester credit hours. It's also different by level. So undergraduate courses are weighted differently than master's level, differently than doctoral level, et cetera. The coordinating board recommended funding for the operations support formula in the example here is $56.79 per weighted semester credit hour. And this rate, the $56.79 times the 37 million equals the level of funding recommended per year through this part of the formula, which would be $2.1 billion. The recommendations, when developed, will be provided to the legislature, who will then decide how much to appropriate. So again, this is for the recommendation. And the amount appropriated will be allocated to the institutions using the coordinating board formula, so the institution's funding will be proportional to their share of statewide weighted semester credit hours. A good example is if an institution has 5% of the weighted semester credit hours, it would get 5% of the operations support funding that's dedicated to semester credit hour funding. So again, the legislature decides what is appropriated, but these fundings, the funding mechanism equitably distributes the funding to the institutions based on the information we have about what students are taking and the weights for the semester credit hours. Yes.
Yes, Dr. Eklund, I have a question.
Sure.
I was recently watching one of the Board of Regents meetings online, and this topic actually came up. How is actually distributed, and I think I spoke to Dr. Gardner about this, and that you said the engineering classes are reported, but is there any particular, are we looking to work towards getting something other than just an average? Because I know that some schools may report maybe, like you said, a liberal arts program versus an engineering program. So is there any consistency to this?
There is. So it's the amount is the same for every institution. So the funding for a liberal arts course semester credit hour is going to be consistent across institutions. And we've got about 20 disciplines that we look at, and again, to equitably distribute, the decision is made to distribute that money based on an average of what's reported. And David, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but were they referring to a change by institution in this case?
Yeah, because I think they were trying to compare like tuition prices and what would value, the value of a tuition at a certain university, a large university here in the state versus 2 or 3 other large universities comparison in their universe. And they were trying to say that they were the most economical depending on how the formula funding worked. And they did tie in the coordinating board, so that was, I said that was why they were looking at the way that we actually do this.
Right. Well, one important, I believe it's important to have it be equitable for all institutions, because an institution might start reporting more funding, adding more funding in an attempt to try to take a larger proportion of the share if it was based on what each institution spends alone, just their portion, whereas if it's an average for all institutions, then you're less likely to see people trying to influence that by gathering this is what it's costing overall at all institutions and taking that average. David, do you want to?
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
So one of the things we hear during legislative testimony is some institutions that are more regional institutions that have the cheaper programs will mention that they're one of the most economical. That is largely due to the fact that they do have the lower cost programs. Whereas your Tier 1 research institutions that have your more cost programs, your higher cost programs will get more formula funding. But again, that's tied to the program mix that each institution has.
Thank you. And here are the 3 charges, the 3 commissioner charges that were provided to the General Academic Formula Advisory Committee to make recommendations for the appropriate funding levels for the formula and space use support, to make recommendations for the appropriate funding level for and refinement of the graduation bonus, which we'll talk about in more detail after Mr. Hugetts presents, and also to study and make recommendations on the treatment of competency-based courses and formula allocations. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Ed Hugetts. He is the Interim Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of Houston Downtown. He chaired our General Academic Advisory Committee. And thank you very much for being here with us today, Mr. Hugetts.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the committee. Started in the middle of Harvey. In fact, I couldn't make the meeting because we were flooded out at the first meeting, and so I participated by telephone. I do think Harvey set something of the context of our deliberations. I mean, I think there were two big realities that the committee was looking at. On the one hand, there was the reality of the financial situation of the state and what the next legislative session would be facing, and including, the issue of finding funds to help universities that had experienced damages during Harvey. Then there were was the context of the 60 by 30. I think everybody on the committee was very determined to bring forward a recommendation to the commissioner, and that would be aggressive about the universities being able to move forward. And one of the differences between the Closing the Gaps plan and the 60 by 30 plan is really its shift in emphasis from just looking at access. It's not that access has been eliminated from a consideration, but the importance of success has really been something that has been highlighted by the state, by the legislature, by the coordinating board, and by each board of regents. I do think that we want to find a way to make more of the students that enter into higher education successful. The other piece that the committee looked at is the changing demographics of the state. There has been a very pronounced shift at the University of Houston downtown. We're looking at something around 75% of the students being first-generation students. I mean, these students are coming from families where they did not go to college, they did not have professional careers, and so now as the state looks at trying to get 60% of the population ages 25 to 34 with some sort of higher education credential, that is a very dramatic political policy change. That does require a shift not only in the increase in funding, but in a shift in many ways in what is it that we're funding. I mean, one of the things in the committee's recommendation is really the importance of the graduation bonus, which focuses on completion and which really gives extra emphasis on students who come in at risk, meaning they come from families making less than $40,000 annually. And from students who do not not at the national average of SAT. In other words, they're not prepared for college. And the kind of resources and the kind of interventions that are necessary in order to support them to graduate. We really very kind of admire the fact that the community college sector years ago was able to come up with a success points system, which we admired greatly. It's just in our deliberations, we were never able to come together and sort of say, okay, what is the first step into recognizing performance and recognizing the importance of student success? So a lot of what I would ask us to focus on is that dimension. And we had three charges, and Dr. Eklund has summarized them very well. I mean, the first is the general operations formula. That is the big formula for universities. A great majority of funding that is appropriate to universities is appropriated through the distribution of the operations formula, through that formula matrix that Dr. Eklund described. It is, by the way, something that when administrators come from other states to Texas is something of a mystery, because not all other states have the way that Texas has defined it, even though Texas has always been seen as a model of equitable distribution of funding. I mean, the matrix, which does divide it up by the cost of disciplines across the cost at different levels, so, you know, what it would cost the first 2 years, for what it costs juniors and seniors, masters and PhD students. I mean, that's always, by the 20 disciplines, that's always been seen as something of a fair way for everybody to receive this distribution. That mechanism leads to us taking the semester credit hours, multiplying it by the weights, so you get that 36 million weighted SCHs, and then there's a figure that is applied to that by the legislature. Last year, this year, what we're recommending, again, consistent with the community colleges, we, recognizing where we are in funding in the state, we requested what we thought was a reasonable, moderate recommendation, and that is to fund growth, whatever the growth was, and the estimate of the coordinating board right now is that the growth in the biennium will be about 2.6%. And then the second piece was to fund inflation, which would be the same 1.7% CPI that the community colleges. I mean, that would move the appropriations up on the operations part by $175 million over the biennium. It would bring the total appropriations to the universities to $4.2 million. So that is the recommendation of the committee that was submitted to the commissioner. There's a second part which deals with space, the maintenance of space and operations. And that's a lesser amount. The recommendation there was to recommend by square foot a $5.36 increase. That, again, was based on the estimate of the coordinating board for an increase in space over the biennial period, which was approximately a 5% increase in space. This would result in a $776 million increase in formula funding. So put together, it's about a $4.9 billion total budget for the next biennium. That really deals with the first element of the charge, the operations funding itself. The second element is deals with the way that we would calculate the split when looking at the space operations piece and the maintenance of the space piece. And over the years, there have been balancing between what portion of the costs are in utilities and what portion are in just maintenance of operations. And during a period not so long ago when the price of oil was going up very fast and the cost of utilities was going up very fast, we saw the relationship between utilities cost and operations become a major factor in our budgets. So over time, that has leveled out. And now the differences are not as great, and the pattern is a little more predictable, at least temporarily. What that, again, is calculated by surveys of the universities, which go out, not unlike the collection of the data of the semester credit hours by discipline and by level that is used for the appropriation. So that's how that is calculated. And it's pretty consistent. The methodology that was used in the last biennium is the same methodology that is used in this one. That's charge number one. Charge number two. Charge number one does have one other dimension, and this is again, Dr. Eklund referred to this. This deals with universities that are less than $5,000 in enrollment, 5,000 students in enrollment. That group receives a supplemental appropriation of $750,000 during the biennium. So that group, when they pass 5,000 enrollment, they are incrementally decreased until they reach 10,000 students, at which point they are no longer receive that supplement. And so this number varies. It's one of the numbers that you'll see that goes down. I think that there's a decrease anticipated this coming biennium of $600,000, which is a 3.9% decrease in the allocation. And that's being done just because of the way that they're hitting that 10,000 student enrollment level. The next charge is the graduation bonus. And I have to tell you, this is I do think that the Formula Committee, Advisory Committee, after a long period, I've been on the committee 6 years, so over a long period of time and a long series of discussions, we have settled on something which there is really a consensus of support for. I think, we finally have got something that we believe will help the way that we've seen the community college system help. This one is really built on a simple concept of just having what is the most important metric in student success. And it really comes down to it's who graduates. One of the things that really in the past has, I think, confused the whole discussion about measuring performance of an institution in regards to completion is that there were sometimes 20 variables that were brought into play regarding the appropriate metrics to measure student success. And I think that created a lot of confusion in policymakers' point of view of understanding, well, how do these different metrics kind of work together? And in many cases, there was a logic to them, but it took so long to explain that it really never caught on. None of these proposals caught on. I will tell you, as an administrator, they weren't catching on with the faculty in the university either. I mean, the university understands the formula funding by semester credit hours and by enrollment. That is something every faculty member in Texas universities understand the way that works. The shift to the emphasis on student success, that is something when they hear 10 variables that they're supposed to be looking at, it just isn't, they can't retain that into memory so that it's a part of their everyday working. When you say it is the graduation of students, it is the degrees awarded that is driving the bonus points in this graduation bonus proposal. That's really simple to understand, and I think it begins to bring a proper balance between access and success. It begins to give us a policy that becomes part of a management and operations, daily operations factor that will allow us to address the goals of 60 by 30. If we're going to get to that 550,000 students by 2030, this is the kind of proposal that I think we should see and move forward on. It would award every bachelor's degree that is awarded by an institution $500 per bachelor's degree. And if the student was at risk, meaning that they came from families where households of less than $40,000, or if they entered college with an SAT of less than the national average, they are considered at risk. They would instead receive, the university would receive, when they awarded that bachelor's degree, $1,000 per student. That would, per year, cost the state on something close to $80 million. And what the committee recommended is that in order to make this, given, again, the financial limitations, so as a consideration of how to support this and make this taken more seriously, we recommended phasing into this, as is done occasionally by the legislature, that we wouldn't receive that funding in the first year. We would see it in the second year, and then in subsequent biennia, it would be, the $160 million would be appropriated. The one last point is the Formula Committee, which had a very vigorous conversation about this, did want to, in their recommendation, did want to stress the importance of fully funding the operations, because that's what keeps the institutions moving forward. So they ask that this funding be done separately. The last charge was the competency base, and really, Dr. Eklund has covered most of this. This is a new area for the state of actually organizing degrees around competencies for adults who have considerable experience in the workplace and who, as they enter college, have some credit but no degree, and but they have considerable workforce experience, a lot of which have academic value. So this is a program that, instead of organizing itself totally around just a set of courses, embeds competencies that employers are looking for in the promotion of their workforce to higher levels of management. That's one example of this particular program. And this allows this to be self-paced. I mean, it really allows somebody who comes in and knows about something with regards to budget or planning to take a competency test. If they show mastery in that, they move on. If they show deficiencies in that area, then they are given modules that allow them to develop their skills in that point to the until they get to passing the test with what is considered a level of mastery and considered a level that employers would recognize as the skills that they need to see in the worker to see them promoted in the workforce. It has the additional value of making this not only kind of accelerates the employee students towards the degree faster, but it also is much more affordable. I mean, the cost for the institutions when we set this up will allow us to do this in such a way that that there will be the dual benefit of acceleration and affordability offered to adult learners that we think the state needs. I mean, the coordinating board has been very good about tracking how many of our people in our population have some higher education degree, but never attain the credential, never attain the, there are millions of students out there, and this is an attempt to move in and offer them an option. Again, as Dr. Eklund has pointed out, the formula funding for this would be based upon the courses that aggregated the competencies. This is something that universities have worked with the coordinating board on in the last 5 years. It allows us to treat a set of competencies within a course. It allows the state then to formula fund that course as it does other courses that it recognizes that are equivalent to these particular courses. So the recommendation is that we continue to fund the competency-based courses according to the course equivalencies that we've done in the past. We are asking universities to track their expenses regarding this because, you know, at a certain point, there could be an alternate way to fund this by competencies, but this is not something that is, you know, yet mature enough for us to kind of recommend to the commission at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hugetts, and you actually made my job a little easier with your explanation, so thank you. I'm now going to briefly talk about the commissioner's recommendation. Again, the commissioner is going to be focused on funding for projected growth, inflation at the 1.7%, and successful completions through the graduation bonus. On this slide, you'll see that the commissioner concurs with the advisory committee's recommendations regarding the projected growth and inflation, but you'll see a difference in the amount of funding for the graduation bonus. The commissioner is actually recommending a higher rate of funding for in both years of the biennium for the graduation bonus at $160 million. So that would be the $500 per graduate and $1,000 per at-risk graduate, but again, for both years of the biennium. And also, I want to talk a little bit about other priorities of the commissioners in terms of thinking about that graduation bonus. Again, you did a nice job, Mr. Hugetts, of explaining the importance of the graduation bonus and who we're going to be reaching. In terms of the two metrics, we look at students who receive a Pell Grant or whose SAT or ACT is below average, and in general, the Pell Grant, in terms of the family contribution, that may vary, but the determination will be based on if a student did receive Pell. So again, just those two metrics. And then, okay, and there's the metrics again explained. And then in terms of the graduation bonus, this slide shows what the advisory committee is recommending and what the commissioner's recommending. And I think that the difference is that although the commissioner concurs with the per graduate amounts, he does recommend funding for both biennia, and he's also recommending that the graduation bonus be rolled into the operations support formula so it be firmly institutionalized. And he recommends that this change be included in the introduced version of the General Appropriations Act for the 2021 biennium. He wants this graduation bonus to be part of the operations support formula regardless of whether there's an increase in funding, and he thinks it's critically important for helping us reach our 60 by 30 TEX goals. And then finally, the commissioner made the same recommendation as the committee in terms of the competency-based education, and again, you did a very good job explaining what that is all about. So now we're going to move to the discussion portion of the meeting, if there's any questions or discussion, and then the committee will consider the commissioner's recommendations to the committee.
I had a question for you, Mr.
Sure.
Hugetts, regarding the graduation bonus. So I had asked Dr. England the question earlier because I wanted to...
Danny, your mic.
Oh, my mic?
Get it closer to you.
Is it off? I wanted to understand a little bit more the relationship between student success and the graduation bonus. And I know it's been something that's been on the table for GAI institutions for the past at least 2-3 sessions as a line item separate from the formula funding. I was wondering whether or not it might be possible. I see in the minutes of one of your meetings that the committee acknowledged the need for stability in having this additional bonus that's in accordance with some of the testimony we've heard on performance-based funding. So my question is to you, whether it's possible that building the graduation bonus into the INO formula might insulate it from future legislatures deciding to cut that item in the next biennium.
So this is, I'm representing the committee at this point, and the committees had a very long discussion about this issue of including it in the existing INO formula. And there were clearly there was some feeling that you are exactly right, that this is now, we've gotten to the point that it would be a good time to include this performance-based funding is inside of our regular operations. However, the majority of the committee felt very strongly that given the circumstances of where we were, we are still, when we're talking about a factor of funding the weighted SCH by $56 compared to where we were in 2011, where we were at $62. The feeling was that, and the pressure that exists in terms of universities holding their tuition and fees down so that they're affordable to the population, that really the operational piece is still a major factor, and the recommendations should reflect the committee's opinion that fund that first and then come to this other thing. There was no disagreement that this is important. The funding, by the way, for the graduation bonus would also go to that to helping deal with this changing demographic. I mean, it would go to things like increased advising in the first couple of years, increased tutoring, and other interventions, I mean, which are really, universities have spent, and community colleges have spent millions of dollars in recent years in order to get that, be able to support this expanded demographic coming into higher education. So I think that that there was a real balancing act going on in the committee with that regard. So, but you're absolutely at the heart of it, and I appreciate you reading the minutes.
And would your members maybe agree that having a graduation bonus, 500, 1,000, based on absolute number of graduates, might be a more predictable measure than the, I mean, as I understand it on the slide that you presented, the INO is an institution's formula would be dependent on its proportion of the total, all of the institutions.
Right.
So that seems like it might be a little bit more difficult to forecast than something like.
Right. Yeah, no, the variable on that, I mean, and again, universities manage that. We've done it for so many years, we take it for granted. And so we are very sensitive about ups and downs in the performance of enrollment, and we do not only have an eye on how we're performing, but how is everybody else performing around us, because it could lead to a lesser amount even though we go up, I mean, because the others went up more. So that is a factor, and to be rewarded for achievement would be much more predictable. A good point.
Any other question?
Yeah, just an editorial comment, follow up. If you put it part of the formula, so then you're really competing not only for growth in numbers, right, semester credit hours, but you're really competing for what matters.
Absolutely.
And that's success, completion. So I think the commissioner, in my opinion, is correct that we need to roll it into the base formula.
I wish that had been my idea. It's actually an idea that was generated by colleagues. Just very quickly, the difference in the amount that we propose to make to the legislature regarding funding for the general academic institutions, I'm proposing $80 million more, and that's simply so that we can implement the graduation bonus in the first year of the biennium as well as the second. The proposal from the Formula Funding Advisory Committee, as Ed noted, is intended to take effect the second year of the biennium. I want to get this done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Otherwise, the recommendations are the same in terms of the funding. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? I do want to add before there's a, oh, yes, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I do want to add before we move on to the committee's vote that we did share a sheet with you that shows some historical information about what funding was appropriate. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that if you were interested in looking at past years, and it includes the current recommendations from the committee and the commissioner.
Okay. Any other questions? I'd like to have a motion on this commissioner's recommendation and a second, please.
So moved on the motion.
Second.
You need to make the motion. State the motion.
Commissioner's recommendation.
On the, so is a motion to, for the commissioner's,
To accept the
okay, I just wanted to be sure. I'm sorry.
No, you read it first, second.
Okay. Any other, all say aye?
Aye.
Any nays? Motion 5A, number 2 is approved.
Okay, and then we're on to our last sector, our health-related institutions. You can see on this slide, this shows the portion of funding for health-related that comes through the formulas. Again, that's in the dark green. The majority of fund, in terms of the HRIs, they're funded through 5 formulas. Unlike the general academics, which use those weighted semester credit hours, the HRIs are funded primarily through full-time student equivalents. Mission-specific funding is provided for patient care, research, and training programs at UT MD Anderson Cancer Center and UT Health Science Center Tyler. They have few students, but of course a lot of patient care services. Graduate medical education provides funding for residency programs, which give medical school graduates hands-on training, and research shows that students who do their residencies in Texas are more likely to practice in Texas. Here are the 3 charges to the committee, and I'd now like to introduce Ms. Penny Harkey, who is chairwoman of the HRI committee, and she is vice president and chief financial officer of the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center in Lubbock. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. First, I want to give you a little bit of an overview. Some of you may be new, and talk a little bit about health-related institutions. There's kind of a running joke within health-related institutions that if you've seen one health-related institution, you've seen one health-related institution. Because they vary so much. You have MD Anderson, as she mentioned. MD Anderson is one of our health-related institutions. They're focused on cancer research. They also, they have very, very small enrollment. You also have UT Southwestern, which is research-focused. Their enrollment is more in the stable environment, and they also focus on your graduate medical education programs. Vary that from Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center out in West Texas, who is very much focused on providing healthcare providers for rural West Texas. So we have a large enrollment where we're trying to provide those healthcare providers out there. So the formulas are addressing the various missions of the health-related institutions. Another thing that to keep in mind is that each of our programs, a medical school program, a nursing program, pharmacy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, they are all accredited separately. We have the SACS accreditation, and then they have their own accreditation standards, which depends on pass rate for licensure exams, student to faculty ratios, and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of oversight already at the health-related institutions. One of the focuses of the Health-Related Institution Formula Advisory Committee was predictable funding, because you have those mature institutions, as I mentioned, that their enrollment is not growing significantly. There's variables related to that. In order to grow, if you grow enrollment in a specific program, you've got to make sure that you have clinical training sites for those programs also, so that it's not just what we can do within our four walls, but where can we train those people outside of the institution, and so that sometimes is a limiting factor. So you have those programs that are really more in, as far as student enrollment goes, they are more the mature institution, and then you have those institutions that are growing. Maybe they're new, like our El Paso campus, and they are growing. Everybody, though, and I think it's been said, we need predictable funding, because when the legislature does not provide growth for funding, what happens? The rate per student goes down, and that's impacted the health, not just rate per student, rate per square foot, and in our case, the research enhancement rate has gone down also. So that is a significant push. And although our recommendations are going to look a little different from what the other two committees are, there was a significant amount of discussion about the importance of funding growth, importance of funding growth, importance of funding growth. But our recommendations do look a little different, and we'll go forward and take a look at what our formulas are. We have our I&O formula. As Dr. Eklund mentioned, that is based on weighted student FTE. E&G space support, again, is driven at by the coordinating board's predicted square footage through the space model, which is different. We have the health sciences centers have a different space model than the general academics do. Research enhancement has a base amount plus a percentage of research expenditures to recognize those institutions that are primarily research intensive. Graduate medical education, that is to support the educational component of medical residency programs. And I know there's a significant push by the legislature. There's been a lot of recognition that we can train medical students all day, but they have to go into a postgraduate medical residency program, and if we don't have those slots in Texas for them to go into, they're going to go somewhere else. And as Dr. Eklund mentioned, they're going to potentially end up staying where they do their residency. So we want to make sure that we are not an exporter of medical students into out-of-state residency programs. So that's the significance of that graduate medical education formula. And there's also been other funding provided by the legislature that the coordinating board manages that's outside of the formula for new and growing residency programs that meet certain criteria. Mission specific, again, that's related to the MD Anderson related to cancer, and UT Health Science Center Tyler for chest diseases, to emphasize the funding needed to focus on those areas who are primarily in the patient care and service industry. The commissioner had those three charges. The first one is to make recommendations about the appropriate funding levels for each of these formulas. The second is to make recommendations for the appropriate weights. We said that the I&O formula is based on a weighted student FTE, and so did we have any suggested changes to the weights between the various programs? And the third is to see if there needs to be any other programs added with a specific weight to the I&O formula. We'll spend most of the time right here talking about the first charge, which is the funding level. Again, our committee spent a tremendous amount of time talking about the criticality of funding growth. That is something that we totally recognize. But the health-related institutions wanted to really emphasize to the legislature as our recommendation that the rates that have dropped so significantly because growth has not been funded is critical to these institutions. So For example, our I&O rates have dropped 17% since the 2000-2001 year, and then E&G space support has dropped 45%, and research enhancement has dropped 59%, and that's the funding rates that are related to that. So although we totally support, again, the growth funding, we wanted to emphasize that for these mature institutions who now are operating at possibly the same enrollment levels, but at 17% less as far as the rate goes, how critical that is for continued operations. Graduate medical education, that one, the first three, let me say that, we focused on those because those were the first three initial formulas for health-related institutions, and they were implemented in the 2000-2001 biennium. Graduate medical education was actually implemented later. It was implemented, I believe, in the 2006-2007 biennium. That's about the time that the legislature really started focusing on that growth. We are recommending that the rate be returned to the highest rate that has ever been, and that was about 2 biennia ago at a rate of $6,653. And then based on the General Appropriations Act, mission-specific, the rates for mission-specific will be based on the average increase of the I&O formula. So that one has kind of a cap on it. If I&O goes up, then mission-specific would go up. So we have kept that connection between the two. The second charge was to determine if there needed to be any new weights or any changes to the current weights for the I&O formula. There were no recommended changes. And in the third, if there needed to be a new specialty rate. University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston has a biomedical informatics program. That is really a very data-related with lots of equipment, lots of analytics, and that sort of thing. And they are currently funded at the allied health rate, which is 1. Our weights range from 1. You take your FTE, multiply it times the weight. Allied health is at 1. Medicine is 4.753. So this program really costs more to operate than what the allied health rate, weight brings to pass. So the recommendation would be that there would be a consideration of adding a new weight for this program. But you notice, and it's similar to, I believe, what the general academics mentioned, it's contingent upon funding of growth. We don't want anything new added to this unless growth is funded to deliver that predictable formula for all programs, whether they are mature or whether they are growing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harkey, and thank you to your committee for their work. In terms of the commissioner recommendation for the health-related institutions, again, the focus on projected growth, increases for inflation at 1.7% for the biennium, and the commissioner is also recommending increases for graduate medical education. So here's our comparison chart. Again, we see the commissioner concurring with the committee's recommendation for increases in projected growth and inflation, but not for the additional rate increase, which you explained. And you also see here that additional $18 million for additional graduate medical education funding. I will add that these amounts do include funding for the 2 new medical schools that are up and running, the Dell Medical School at UT Austin and the medical school at UT Rio Grande Valley. And so they are included. Although they are part of the institutions, they are included with the HRIs in terms of the formula funding recommendations for their physicians and also graduate medical education. Now we have our time scheduled for any questions or discussion regarding the commissioner's recommendations. Yes.
I just had a question for Ms. Harkey. Would you remind the board, going back to the slide on page 32, or our page 32, the graduate medical education, the funding rate, you stated, was implemented during the 2006 biennium. What was the rate, and you're asking now for 66.53, was that what was the rate then, or is there a big difference that we're talking about?
It was not as large of a difference at that point in time, no. It's grown. It had grown. It went up significantly from that point to the $6,653. I believe it was about $4,600. David, do you have that on the graph?
That's fine. I just wanted some kind of an idea for the board. And then I just had one last question. On the biomedical informatics regarding the University of Houston. So would you clarify? I didn't quite understand exactly. I understand it's grouped with allied health, but we are going to address this, right? How is the committee recommending that you address?
That there would be a separate weight.
But that separate weight would be contingent on that, something else you stated, that it would be.
That growth be funded for the existing formulas first. So, because when you add that new weight, it is going to cost additional funding, and we want to make sure that the legislature's funding priorities are to fund growth at the current structure of the formula before a new weight is added.
And how will that impact, let's say that doesn't happen, how will that impact the biomedical informatics piece? It just stays the same and allied?
Yes,
in
yes,
the
that's
allied
correct.
health
It would
group,
still
or-
stay at the allied health rate.
Okay.
Yes, and Ms. Acosta, that's why we didn't include a commissioner recommendation for that, since his recommendation was to fund at a lower level.
Thank you.
I've got a question for the commissioner. So I guess I don't understand all this entirely, but okay, so the rate increase, you said, well, that's not a good idea. You're not recommending that. And why is that? Just political reality, or if you could just give us some background?
Well, Julie can explain that better than I can, but I think the main factor is we thought that what we were proposing effectively met the needs of the health-related institutions, and then frankly, I just don't think that a double-digit increase in funding is likely to go very far. We wanted to be prudent.
Yes, and again, this was consistent with the other sectors in terms of the growth and inflation.
Focus on growth, enrollment growth, and inflation, and keep the other proposed increases to a minimum.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to compliment and thank each of the chairs of these three important advisory committees. And I had a question because I think Mr. Huggets mentioned that you've been on the committee for 6 years. I know that presidents and the chancellors make the recommendations to the board and we approve them. Is there any suggestions that y'all may have? I know some of you have been as chairs and on these advisory committees for several years, so thank you so much for doing that, because I know that's like volunteer on top of your regular jobs. But do you have any comments or questions about the tenure and recommendations?
This is my second time to be on the Formula Funding Advisory Committee, and the first time around, 6 years, I mean, there's a learning curve on it, and so each year I learned more, and this being my second go-around on the committee, I feel a lot more comfortable this time, but I think it's complicated, and there is a learning curve on it.
Does that mean we can ask you to do this again?
I have 2 more years, and then this is...
I want to add my appreciation as well. They did a lot of work and took it very seriously and made very, very strong recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, I will just say one, and I'm sort of repeating myself. I do think Texas is a different moment in its history, and in terms of the population that is the future of Texas. And I do think policy needs to keep up with that. We really, this 60 by 30 plan is the right imperative. I totally believe that we have the right, but we need to make sure that we have a funding system, that we have the budgets in order to achieve that. And I thought that this committee that worked this past fall on this was really very felt an urgency about that I really applaud, and I hope that is maintained in the future.
I think I drew the short straw because this was my first term, and I was selected as chair. So of the committee, I think I drew the short straw this go around, but it's been an enjoyable process. And we appreciate all the support from the coordinating board and staff.
Thank you. There's no further question. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful job.
And I guess next on the agenda is to have the vote on the commissioner's recommendations for the health-related institutions. Yes.
I'd like to make a motion and a second on the commissioner's recommendation, please.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
There. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is passed. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 5B, consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the annual report about the financial condition of a state's community college district. General Appropriation Act, Senate Bill 185th, Texas Legislature, Regular Section, Rider 12-3-216. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner of Strategic Planning. Funding is available to answer any question. Is there any questions?
And I just want to briefly say that this is a report that we do every year, and we do provide this information to our community college trustees so that they can see this work that was done.
If there's no discussion, I'd like a motion and a second, please.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion 5B is, agenda item 5B is approved. Agenda item 5C is a report on data highlight, education population, national and international comparison. Dr. Hagee, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will present this item and be available to answer any questions. This item is for information only, please.
Thank you, and good morning. The Strategic Planning and Funding Division provides a data highlight at each CAAP meeting, typically. And today I'm going to be presenting some data regarding the 60 by 30 educated population goal, including the recently updated progress on this metric and some national and international comparison data. Comparing the level of education in Texas to other states is something we've done for many years. But with the start of the 60 by 30 plan, we also began comparing how the Texas population compares to other countries in recognition of the globally competitive world in which we now compete. Today's presentation focuses on the first of the 4 plan goals, the overarching 60 by 30 educated population goal, which aims for at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 to earn a certificate or degree by 2030. Before we jump into the latest data on the educated population goal, I'd like to highlight some important differences between the 60 by 30 educated population goal and the completion goal, which is sometimes mistakenly thought to be one and the same. The educated population goal counts young Texas residents, that is the educational background of all the people who live in Texas, while the completion goal counts credentials conferred by Texas institutions of higher education. One person may have multiple degrees conferred over many years, but would count once in our educated population goal. Meanwhile, for the completion goal, a credential is counted in the year it's conferred, and an individual would be counted each year a new award is earned. The 60 by 30 goal includes people who have migrated to Texas with a certificate or degree, but were educated elsewhere, as well as those who were educated here in the state. Critical to the 60 by 30 goal is the interrelationship between business and industry with higher education in K-12. Because we need to keep an eye both on increasing the number of Texas residents who are prepared for and succeeding in higher education, as well as growing the workforce opportunities available in Texas to maintain talent here or to recruit talent from other states. The percent of the Texas population ages 25 to 34 with a certificate or degree is now 42.3% in our most recently available data. This is good news. This is 1.3 percentage point increase from 2015 when we were at 41%. Between 2014 and 2015, we saw only a 0.7 percentage point increase. So we're moving in the right direction, but we need to keep the pace at 1.3 percentage points a year or higher if we're going to reach our 2030 goal. We rely on the American Community Survey administered by the Census Bureau to help determine the rates of educational attainment in our population in Texas. The American Community Survey and some international data sources give us comparable information for the population in other countries and in other states for people with an associate degree or higher, but it does not include certificates as we do here in our Texas count. Without certificates, we have about 37% of young adult Texans with an associate degree or higher. So you'll see this number without certificates used in the comparison slides that follow. So increasing educational attainment is critical for our future because the workforce in the U.S., in Texas, and around the world is changing. Many more new jobs will require post-secondary education and skills. According to Georgetown University, nationally about 65% of new jobs will require post-secondary education and skills by 2020. In Texas, the estimate is about 59% of new jobs by 2020. These estimates exceed our current proportion of the young adult population of Texans with an associate degree or higher, as I mentioned, 37% currently. So even though levels of education are improving, other countries are improving more quickly, and that means Texas is falling behind. When you compare Texas as a state compared to other countries around the globe, our older population now ranks 8th in the world, but our younger population is 27th. This slide shows data from when the plan was being developed, 2013. It indicates that the oldest working age adults in Texas, ages 55 to 64, had higher levels of educational attainment than the young adult population, the 25 to 34-year-olds, which was about 35% at the time. This is one reason why the plan emphasizes young adults, which are critical to the state's economic future. And looking at the numbers internationally here showcases the reason why the committee who developed the plan was concerned about how the state is doing internationally. We live in a global economy, and since we are competing for jobs that require post-secondary education, we'll need to keep up or risk losing out. On a positive note, the most recent data available show that Texas' young adult population are now ahead of the state's older population at 37%. This slide is simply an update of the one I just shared. However, it's not all good news. You can see that attainment continues to grow in comparison countries. Texas 25 to 34-year-olds are now 10 percentage points behind the U.S. average, as well as below a number of countries, including Canada, Japan, and South Korea. On the next slide, here is some additional detail about the national picture. In addition to showing the highest and lowest states, this slide shows a selection of other states that are large or have diverse populations, including those that might be considered comparable to Texas, like Florida and California. Texas is below average nationally, as well as compared to these peer states. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the anticipated demographic trends in Texas. Texas is a young and growing state, and while many states across the U.S. are facing shrinking populations, Texas has a real opportunity to take advantage with its robust workforce. Texas will continue to become more diverse. As you can see on the slide, by 2030, the number of white residents is projected to decline in all age groups. African American residents are expected to show some growth, and Hispanic residents are projected to grow more rapidly. It's critically important for us to ensure that students of all backgrounds have opportunity to complete affordable, quality programs that prepare them for the workforce. As Woody Hunt, chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, has been known to say, by 2030, there's no doubt we will have a more diverse population, but will we have a more educated workforce? To answer the question in the affirmative, we have considerable work to do. As you can see here, the educational attainment of Hispanic and African American populations trails significantly the white population in Texas. This outcome reflects disparities we see at almost every stage of the education pipeline, where Hispanic and African American students are more likely to confront lower quality schooling, lower likelihood of high school graduation, and access to higher education. We also know that low-income students of all races and ethnicities have particularly poor educational outcomes. The collective challenge we've accepted as a state with the 60 by 30 educated population goal is to reach 60% attainment statewide, and in so doing, addressing educational disparities associated with race and ethnicity in our population. A few key takeaways. The 60 by 30 educated population goal is the overarching goal for the state plan. It counts people, not credentials, credentials completed. Specifically, it focuses on the 25 to 34-year-olds who reside in Texas, either who were educated here or who migrated from elsewhere. The educated population goal is not just about the productivity of institutions of higher education. It requires focused collaboration with K-12, higher ed, and business and industry to address both the supply and demand for workers with post-secondary education. The workforce is changing and requires more working residents with post-secondary credentials, and Texas is behind many other states and countries in terms of the percent of workers with needed certificates and degrees. Key to our achievement of the 60 by 30 goal will be efforts to increase the success of large, growing, and underserved populations in our state, including Hispanic, African American, and low-income students. As a final note, the 60 by 30 goal is part of our regional target effort, and we're actively working with each of the 10 higher education regions to develop their best bet strategies that they believe will help achieve the goal. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Hagee.
Thank you.
This item was for information only. We move on to agenda item 5D. Is a report on pilot study of community college financial reporting by campus. Senate Bill 719, 85th Texas Legislature, regular section. Mr. David Young, Senior Director of Funding for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide a brief update. We'll present this item and will be available to answer questions. This item is for information only.
Senate Bill 719, which passed last session, requires the board, in conjunction with certain community college districts, to submit a report to the LBB by June 1st, 2018. We will be asking you at the April board meeting to approve the report and an affiliated data template, so we wanted to give you an update. The bill requires 5 representative community college districts to participate in a pilot study regarding the feasibility of reporting certain revenue and cost data by instructional site instead of by district, which is the current practice. The coordinating board, in consultation with the community colleges, is required to select the 5 districts. The 5 districts selected are Austin Community College and San Jacinto College, which are very large, North Central Texas College, which is large, McLennan Community College, which is medium, and Howard College, which is small. These 5 districts have been studying best practices for reporting the financial data for each of their campuses. The report we will ask you to approve next month will include these best practices and the template for reporting the data, which will include data definitions. After you approve the report, the 5 participating districts will be required to report their data for fiscal years 2019 and 20 to the board using this template. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Young. Item was for information. Move on to agenda matter 5E. Is a report of facilities project that was sorry, I didn't have my agenda item 5E is a report on facilities project that was submitted to the coordinating board. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will present this item and will be available to answer any question. This item is for information only.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Anwar. I just wanted to make sure our new board members were aware that although, as you heard earlier from Mr. Wyatt, the board no longer approves facilities projects, there is still a requirement that we review facilities projects, and if we have projects that don't meet one or more of established standards, we do submit a report to the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, and Legislative Budget Board. So you will see at pretty much every CAAP meeting there will be an agenda item about the facilities projects that have been submitted for review. But again, it's only a review and not a proposal for those buildings. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know our materials does include information about the standards that we look at as part of this review.
Any questions? We move on to agenda item 5G because 5F was considered out of order at the beginning of the meeting. 5G is considering adopting the staff recommendation to the board relating the approval of the energy saving performance contract for Texas A&M International University. Mr. Castillo, Vice President of Finance and Administration, and Mr. Liddy, Associate Vice President for Administration, Texas A&M International University, will give a brief presentation and will be available to answer any question pertaining this project.
Yes, and just as in the way of background for our new board members, although the board only reviews and does not approve facilities project, it still has the authority to approve energy savings performance contracts. And there are certain approvals for the less expensive contracts that go through the assistant commissioner. And you'll see there's a matrix provided in your materials on page 2 of agenda item 5G that shows which projects are to be brought to this committee and which projects also need to be brought to the board. So in the presentation today, this is a project that rose to the level of committee approval. And so we have gentlemen from the institution who are here to present just some background information about this contract prior to your discussion of the...
And Dr. Julie Eklund will answer any question regarding this.
Yes, after their presentation, we're happy to answer. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning, and thank
Good
you
morning.
for this opportunity. Excuse me. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. Our energy conservation project partner is Schneider Electric Buildings of America, and the projects we've worked on with them will touch virtually every building on our campus and every square inch of our irrigated landscape grounds. As with all ESCOs, Schneider Electric is guaranteeing savings from these projects that will exceed the costs of the projects themselves. And these savings projections have been verified by an outside third-party engineering firm. The savings will come from a reduction in electricity usage in excess of 4 million kilowatt hours per year and a reduction in water consumption in excess of 46,000 kilogallons per year. Trevor Little, our Associate Vice President for Administration and the project manager for this undertaking, will now elaborate on the details of this project.
Good morning, everyone. This multifaceted project has been designed to impact every area of our campus. The installation of comprehensive metering on the campus will allow us to make more data-driven decisions regarding our utility use and future projects. As the largest fully managed green space in Laredo, our campus park is a jewel of the community. Our irrigation project, combined with other irrigation upgrades that we've made in the last year, will allow us to also reduce demand on city resources related to water and sewer systems, in addition to the net savings we will achieve. As you see, we are going to be going through interior and exterior lighting retrofits, the irrigation project, and then working on our chilled water plant as well. This project provides us a longer payback period and allows us to take care of some other capital items through the diversion of operating expenses, and increases the enhanced reliability and overall quality of our campus physical plant. Financially, $9 million in implementation costs, a 14.9-year simple payback on energy conservation measures. Working with our Treasury services, we opted on a 20-year financing term, which gives us the flexibility to not only realize savings for payback of the bonds through the cost avoidance, but also reinvest some of those cost avoidance funds immediately into other campus projects. And this allows us to achieve 4 major goals: the reduction of electric and water consumption, the replacement of capital budget items, improvement of learning environment conditions for students, faculty, and staff, and the provision of educational experience for students to gain practical, transferable skills for home and work environments. This has been reviewed by our Office of General Counsel, my esteemed colleague, the CFO, and outside professional engineers. We are seeking your approval to move forward with this energy savings project and what it will do for our campus community.
Question. First of all, thank you both for traveling from Laredo. It's a good distance and appreciate the work you do. My question, I think, is to Dr. Eklund is, why are we having to approve this and not the Board of Regents of Texas A&M University?
So as you might recall from the prior meeting where we discussed our responsibility and statute as a board, your responsibility and statute as a board in terms of reviewing the energy saving performance contract. Now it's my understanding that there are additional, and I'm going to look to Tom, there are additional approvals that would need to happen along the way. But in terms of this board, we are required to approve the projects. You handed over authority for some of the lower amount or projects with a shorter payback period to me as the assistant commissioner who was ever in that role for strategic planning and funding. But the larger projects, you decided you wanted them to be brought to either the committee or the board as part of this review. So this is just one review, I believe, overall in terms of this.
And Ms. Eklund, if I might add, Mr. Farias, our Board of Regents has already approved this project as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought that would be the case.
Any other question? If not, I need a motion and a second, please.
Make the motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda item 5G is approved. Agenda item 5HI is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating the proposed addition of Chapter 21, new subchapter C, Section 21.45, 21.49 of Board Rules concerning student indebtedness. Senate Bill 887, 85th Legislature, Texas Legislature, regular section. Dr. Grossman, Senior Director of Innovation and Policy Development, will present this item and will be available to answer any question.
Good morning, committee members. The rules for your consideration before you delineate the statute established by Senate Bill 887, which states that at least annually, higher education institutions shall provide loan indebtedness information electronically to students. Implementation of SB 887 begins later this year in the 2018-2019 academic year, when institutions are required to begin sending debt information to enrolled students. The statute is directly related to the fourth goal in the Higher Education Strategic Plan 60 by 30 text, the student debt goal. The purpose of the student debt disclosure information is to help students become and remain informed about their education debt. During the development process for 60 by 30 text, the Brookings Institute released findings from a study that suggested a significant share of undergraduate students do not understand how much they are paying for college or how much debt they are taking on. SB 887, now Education Code 52.335, was designed to address this lack of awareness. The rules specify several sections in the legislation. First, the rules identify which institutions are to send student loan indebtedness information. The statute applies to public or private nonprofit institutions and to entities that offer alternative educator certification, so long as the institution or entity enrolls one or more students receiving state financial aid administered by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, as specified in Chapter 52 of the Texas Education Code. Second, the rules identify which students will receive the annual electronic debt information. Students who are enrolled at the institution, who have a balance on at least one student loan, and whose education debt records are obtained by the institution at which they are enrolled, will receive this debt disclosure. Third, the rules clarify what information is to be shared in the education debt disclosure. The disclosure is required to include 6 elements. The first identifies the data source for federal education loan data. The next 4 elements clarify what information must be included in the electronic disclosures according to statute. These include estimates of education loan debt and a statement disclosing that the estimate is not an official record of the student's education indebtedness. The final element clarifies that debt disclosures must be sent electronically in a manner that complies with the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, and with the institution's own privacy standards. The coordinating board drafted these rules after seeking input from institutions across the state. For example, we shared the draft rules with the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, and we received feedback. Draft rules were posted in the Texas Register for 30 days, and the public comment period closed this past Sunday on March 18. We received 3 comments and have responded, as you see in your supplemental material. Staff have reviewed these comments and determined they do not require major substantive changes to the rules, although we did make minor adjustments. These minor adjustments address the comments, such as clarifying the language around the required federal data source and the language around the types of loans to be included in the disclosure. Thank you for consideration of these rules, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have one question for you. You kind of touched on it, but how are you protecting the students' information?
The privacy information?
Yes.
So the statute requires that the debt disclosure be sent electronically. Now, that could mean several possible ways an institution might do that. We don't specify the method of communication to allow for local innovation. But one such way could be that the institution creates a PDF, a letter in a PDF, and they send it electronically to the student through a secure email, their secure email portal. Or they may have secure online portals, which many institutions already have for students, and they may attach the information through that secure portal. We do require that whatever method they use complies with FERPA, the federal law, and with the institution's privacy standards. So we will trust that institutions will engage in that practice, and all institutions already do for many different pieces of information. But thank you for asking that.
Welcome. Thank you.
Any other question? If not, I need a motion and a second, please.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion 5H, agenda item 5H is approved. We move on to agenda item number 5H2, which is consideration or adopting Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendment to Chapter 22, Subchapter 1, Section 22.164, 22.166 and 22.169-22.171 of the board rules concerning the provision for the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program, TASSP, House Bill 6685, Texas Legislature, Regular Section. Dr. Charles Pearl, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Program, will be available to answer any questions. Any questions, please? No? So I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Agenda item 5H2 is approved. We move on to yes. No, adjournment. I need a motion and a second.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's 11:55. You guys can go to lunch. Thank you.
I would recommend that we open the cause meeting and if you desire to go to lunch,